Jimmy Lai and Lee Cheuk-yan among people under ICAC investigation. Discussions continue on draft framework for Hong Kong political reform. And the accidental killing of a shooting instructor by a 9-year-old girl.
Good evening. The ICAC today searched the homes of 3 people, including Next Media chairman Jimmy Lai and Labour Party legislator Lee Cheuk-yan. The operation is believed to be linked to political donations made by Lai and a LegCo debate on press freedom earlier this year. Evelyn Leung reports.
ICAC officers today searched the homes of Next Media chairman Jimmy Lai and one of the company's executives, Mark Simon. 4 investigators were at Lai's house in Ho Man Tin for about 4 hours this morning.
ICAC was here and they're all gone now, and there's no further comment.
Apart from Jimmy Lai's house, ICAC officers also searched lawmaker Lee Cheuk-yan's home this morning. In a statement, the anti-graft body said it had received corruption complaints, alleging that certain LegCo members received advantages in breach of the Prevention and Bribery Ordinance. The ICAC applied to the court for search warrants and a statutory notice. Officers searched 4 premises, the homes of 3 of those involved, and the office of a lawmaker at the LegCo building. And the statutory notice was served to the Secretary General of a political party. No arrests were made, and the investigation continues. Lee Cheuk-yan earlier acknowledged he had received $1.5 million in donations from Lai on behalf of the Labour Party. Lee said today the ICAC investigation relates to Lai's donations and the LegCo debate on press freedom back in January. He said his party safeguards freedom in Hong Kong and is surprised how that's linked to the donations. During that debate, Lee cited rumors that Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying threatened not to attend the Hong Kong Marathon unless the organizer, Standard Chartered, pulled its ads from certain media. The Next Media chairman had previously admitted that ads had been removed from his newspaper Apple Daily, and that has resulted in significant losses. Others who have or said to have received political donations from Lai, including lawmakers James To, Alan Leung and Claudia Mo, said the ICAC has not contacted them. Mo said the timing of the investigation is suspicious. She also believes the saga involving political donations amounts to political persecution. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
In Beijing, members of the National People's Congress Standing Committee today continued their discussions on a draft framework for Hong Kong's political reform. More group discussions were held this morning at the Great Hall of the People. Local NPC Deputy Maria Tam, one of 12 Hong Kong members invited to sit in on the week-long meeting, said no one in her group suggested any amendments to the draft. She said the most important message she got from the talks was that Beijing sees Hong Kong's one country, two systems policy and the issue of universal suffrage not just from a procedural point of view, but from an overall national policy-making perspective. Zheng Yutong, another local member of the NPC, said he expects no amendments will be made to the draft framework, details of which have been withheld from the public until they're finalized on Sunday. Sources say the framework will throw out most of the reform proposals put forward by Hong Kong political parties, except the ones by the Federation of Trade Unions and the Rural Council, Hung Yee-kuk. The FTU has proposed that the number of nominating committee members could go up to 1,400 from the current 1,200. But Zheng, who's honorary president of the FTU, was hesitant about the increase today. If you change the number, it'll be much more complicated, he said. I personally prefer not increasing the number. Here in Hong Kong, as pro-democracy groups discuss their next moves in anticipation of Beijing's framework for universal suffrage, pro-establishment lawmaker Zhang Yuxing insists the contents of the framework are not the final proposals.
Let me stress, those are not the political reform proposals. It is up to the SAR government to work out together with all the stakeholders, including all the political parties in the Legislative Council, an acceptable proposed method for electing the chief executive in 2017. The proposals are not, well, they're not there yet. They're simply not there yet.
Deng reiterated his concern that it would be very damaging to Hong Kong if constitutional reform fails to pass in LegCo. Should a young child be allowed to fire a submachine gun? Debate rages in the US after a 9-year-old girl accidentally shot dead her instructor in the state of Arizona. Jameson Wong has the story.
This video shows the final moments of firing range instructor Charles Vaca. He was showing the girl how to shoot an Uzi submachine gun with her parents standing nearby. The girl fired one shot and Vaca reset the gun. Then tragedy struck. The girl squeezed the trigger, the recoil wrenched the Uzi upwards, and Vaca was shot in the head. Prosecutors say they won't file charges in the case, but the accidental shooting death of the instructor has sparked debate over youngsters using firearms. One think tank says the girl should never have gotten her hands on the Uzi in the first place.
There is no such thing as gun safety when you're with a child. They can't handle a weapon of that lethality and that power and that weight, frankly.
Others disagree.
I don't see it being a problem that a 9-year-old girl is shooting a submachine gun. That's not the problem. It really comes down to, what did the instructor teach her? Did she fully understand it before picking up the firearm? And then the instructor, he failed by being in the wrong position.
Then there's the gun tourism industry that's gaining popularity in recent years. Both Americans and foreigners have visited shooting ranges firing high-powered weapons. Some gun shop owners say their customers see guns as a big part of American culture, and they want to experience that. But others warn it's better to be safe than sorry. Jameson Wong, TVB News.
The mother of an American journalist held captive by a militant group has released a video in which she appeals directly to Islamic State militants to spare the life of her son. The captors of Steven Sotlov have threatened to execute him unless the United States stops its air campaign against them.
I'm sending this message to you, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi al-Qurashi al-Husseini, the Caliph of the Islamic State. I am Shirley Sotlov. My son Steven is in your hands. Steven is a journalist who traveled to the Middle East to cover the suffering of Muslims at the hand of tyrants. We have not seen Steven for over a year, and we miss him very much. We want to see him home safe and sound and to hug him. Steven has no control over the actions of the U.S. government. I ask you to please release my child. As a mother, I ask your justice to be merciful and not punish my son for matters he has no control over.
So spoke Shirley Sotlov, who released the video yesterday in a direct appeal to the Islamic State to release her son. Steven was last seen in Syria in August 2013. He was threatened with death by Islamic State militants in a video released last week, unless the United States stopped airstrikes on the group in Iraq. The same video showed the beheading of fellow American journalist James Foley. It marked the first detailed public comments from the family since Steven went missing. US officials, including elected lawmakers, say they are working behind the scenes to try and secure his release. And the White House says it's deeply engaged in trying to free all Americans held hostage. It comes as Washington considers airstrikes on Syria, as well as Iraq, to undermine the Islamic State. Earlier this month, the US launched airstrikes on IS positions in Iraq to help Kurdish and Iraqi forces fight back against Islamic State militants. The White House stressed congressional approval for airstrikes in Syria may not be needed, given the growing consensus that IS poses a threat to the stability of the Middle East, rather than Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Indeed, IS militants have been moving with ease between Iraq and Syria, effectively blurring the border between the two countries. Russia says the possibility of lifting sanctions on Iran has emerged thanks to progress in international talks on Tehran's nuclear program. It urged all countries involved to show political will to reach a deal. Iran's foreign minister will meet his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, in Moscow tomorrow to discuss the negotiations with world powers on a decade-old standoff over the Islamic Republic's nuclear ambitions. The 6 world powers and Iran failed to meet a July deadline to negotiate an agreement on which Tehran would curb its nuclear activities in exchange for easing of sanctions.
Ukraine's president says a Russian invasion is underway in southeastern Ukraine. The pro-separatist counteroffensive is erasing any optimism after this week's peace talks between the leaders of both countries. James Aitken reports.
Pro-Russian rebels and Ukrainian soldiers battle for control of a border town in southeastern Ukraine. Ukrainian officials say Russian soldiers crossed the border in armored infantry with rocket launchers in tow. Separatist forces have been pushing west in a new offensive along Ukraine's strategic coastline and have captured new territory far from previous strongholds. The separatists could be seeking to create a land link between Russia and recently annexed Crimea. Russia continues to deny it's supporting the rebels, but a separatist leader says if Russia had entered the conflict, the counteroffensive would already be in Kiev. But in Kiev, there are more ominous warnings. Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk claims Russia is planning to cut off gas supplies to the European Union. He's asking Western countries to freeze Russian assets until Russian forces withdraw from Ukrainian territory. Russia denies the claims and says it intends to fulfill its contractual responsibilities to European importers. Late-night talks in Belarus this week appeared to have made some progress towards ending the conflict. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko said there was agreement on the principles of a peace plan. Now, Russia is accused of escalating the conflict.
These incursions indicate a Russian-directed counteroffensive is likely underway in Donetsk and Luhansk. Clearly, that is of deep concern to us. We're also concerned by the Russian government's unwillingness to tell the truth, even as its soldiers are found 30 miles inside Ukraine.
In the capital city, Kiev, flag-waving protesters turned out to call for more military support for Ukrainian troops in the east, where hopes of ending the crisis are quickly fading. James Aitken, TVB News.
And still to come in our news tonight. 2 young men sentenced to life in prison for murder. July retail sales down by over 3% year-on-year. And a refined search area for flight MH370 off Western Australia.